Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Pharos, the lighthouse of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And it is here that we are hosting this event today. On behalf of Stavros Niarchos Foundation, I would like to welcome you to this fourth edition of the dialogues. And before we actually get to know our guests, let's say a few words. So, Dialogues is the new monthly series of events that is organised exclusively by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And this is done in an effort to present, amongst other things, people who inspire us through their actions and through their words, and to discuss very topical matters and matters of crucial interest in our life. And I think the most topical thing today is, in fact, to talk about love. Eros is, in fact, part of our life at certain moments or on a daily basis. And we see this in various facets. It is considered to be the driver for our inspiration and expression. And you might well wonder, what does Stavros Niarchos have to do with love? Well, we, together with all those that we work with on a daily basis, with whom we're trying to create better conditions, living conditions for our fellow man, well, we are actually motivated by love. A love for what is ideal. So there are people who actually feel nourished by this vision. Their dream tends to be greater than themselves, so that inspires them. They create and they try to offer their utmost in this world. So this set of guests that we have today, our guest today with the moderator, Mrs. Bouzdourou, will try to actually look into this issue, this great concept that has never stopped actually inspiring us throughout time. And I think that after we have food for thought in our psyche, our mind and our soul, we will be able to have Argentinian tango that will in fact be something that will delight our bodies. So I'd like to welcome you all, and I'd like to say that whoever is here or who is watching live and could actually come here to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, well, we'd like to invite you to a night or an evening of tango, and we'll have a live orchestra. Well, thank you very much. Let me hand over to you, Anna, now. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you in turn to this meeting tonight. It is, in fact, an institution now in the context of dialogues every month, and for every month we will discuss points. And tonight we're going to talk about love. It is a feeling that we've all felt, we all know, but I think in the end we might know nothing at all. So I think it's good to actually inquire about this issue, and I think we will all do this, whether here live or through live streaming through the website snf.org. And I'd like to thank you very much for being with us tonight for this discussion. And this will be a line of inquiry. Permit me to kick off now by Mr. Chaniotis, and he is, thanks to technology, close to us, even though he is so far away. So welcome from Athens, Mr. Chaniotis. He is, in fact, the professor in the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Crete, and director of the Museum of Cycladic Art, Mr. Nikos Stampolidis. And we also have with us a lady who has, in fact, created characters that we've identified with. And if this is not the case, at least we've met acquaintances and who have their traits, and family. We might also find the same traits in families and friends, and it's Miss Mirella Papaoikonomou and Nikos Tzavaras, who is a psychiatrist, and he is the honorary president of the Hellenic Psychiatric Association. So I'd like to say, apart from a knot in our stomach, what does love do to our soul? Now, I'd like to warm us up with the first question because, I don't know if one gets thunderstruck because of love, or if it's something that you slowly heat up and then you warm to it. I'd like your approach. What is love? And within the context of science or through our experience, we can actually set the limits. Whether we can actually reflect it, we also seem to have a certain problem with our connection to Mr. Chaniotis, but I hope that this will actually be restored. So, can this sensation and love be reflected in a theory? Well, good evening. I'm in love with ancient Greece. Let me kick off with that. So, I would like to answer your question, what Andronikos said. And this is something that we read, that love is nothing else than, in fact, an impulse. It is an impulse for movements, towards a movement from from a person who's in love towards the target. So it is, in fact, the distance of an arrow that as soon as it leaves the bow, it actually races towards its target. This distance is love. Once it finds its target, it's no longer love. So, what do I mean by that? I think Nikos is going to pick up on this. In my mind, love is in fact an impulse. It is the air, the wind. It is what is actually created towards a person or an object of desire, let's put it that way, which doesn't have to have reciprocity. So that doesn't mean that the object of desire actually responds to us in the same manner. So in this sense, love, in my mind, and for the neuropsychologist, and Mr. Tzavaras is going to talk about this, can last from 2 to 3 seconds to the maximum of 2 or 3 years. Only. Only. Well, I have a lot of questions. Do you know why? Well, I don't know if the interlocutors actually allow me to. I would like to expound. Love is like beauty. It never lasts a long time. And the person who is Eros, beautiful, is the one who is, in fact, young. So 20, 25 years of age. Afterwards, they can be shapely, they can be charismatic, but they are no longer beautiful. So you understand what I mean. And that is why Eros, love, is young. I mean, imagine if you actually named your child Eros and watch it get old.
Well, there are many questions, and I think you may have questions just like I do. But before coming to you, Mrs. Papaoikonomou, let me tell you that on the internet, those of you who are watching us via snf.org, if you'd like to ask us questions, you can do so. And maybe if some of you here are shy and maybe you can't ask a question, so you can send it via the internet, snf.questions. Mrs. Papaoikonomou, you have the floor. Can you hear me? I will agree with you about Eros. it's Eros starting from man, and this arrow is directed to another man, another person. I'm not going to agree on the sea and on art and other things, because this may last much longer when it's not a love between people, because other things do not age the way people do. But there's always an exception to the rule. Let's say when people fall in love when they're old. Well, when you are old and in love, this has to do with the object of desire as well. But often, when we're talking about younger people, and I don't know, love-struck or senior citizens, I don't know if they can take it. Maybe it's too much for them. Well, it's quite dangerous when you're old to be in love, but it's very common, by the way. I think it's just before people feel that they are very old and that they are slowly moving towards death. It's as if one feels the need to be reborn. And maybe this is why they open to love. They've opened up the door of their soul. They're accepting. If I interpret it correctly, maybe because they have so much experience in life, and maybe then old people understand what is running away from them, life itself. And Eros is love. It's movement. This is what Eros is, and this is why it has wings. I mean, the god Eros has wings. Let us not forget that according to Aristophanes, Eros is the son of Nichta, night, and Anemos, the wind. So Eros is like a wind. It surrounds you from all sides. And I say, I love the sea. I love the sea. Why? Because it's the best female, I thalassa in Greek, meaning you actually manage to close your nose and immerse yourself in the sea, and it hugs you with a million hands, not just two. That's beautiful. Now, let us first say that I think that it's the pill to immortality, immortality of the soul. So we know that when a person is in love, this person is alive. This person feels very much alive with everything that goes with it, meaning jealousy, the lack of self-esteem, and everything that accompanies love, all the accessories of love. And we're talking about very difficult feelings as well. But there's no one who doesn't want to experience love, to witness it once or twice in one's life. I would put it otherwise. It would be terrible for someone not to have felt love and not to have experienced love in his lifetime. Mr. Tzavaras, can you hear me? I'm very sorry, but I can't be as eloquent as the previous speakers. My speech is not as flowery as that of my predecessors. But I was thinking of telling you a few things. Could you speak closer to the microphone? I wanted to tell you a few things about puppy love, about when people first fall in love. And this love is between a newborn and its mother. That's the first time one is in love. But after having heard everything else, let me talk a little bit about adolescence, because during adolescence a lot happens, and sometimes these things are contradictory to one another. And let me actually talk a bit about this dichotomy and this fission according to Freud. I'm talking about the adolescent. The adolescent actually dichotomizes the objects of love. There are two categories. On the one hand, we have the famous Madonna, meaning a person that no one wants to touch sexually or erotically. And we have the traces of an idealized face, an idealized person, and a sexual body. So Eros in this day and age is very strong, and this is why we tend to say that we overrate the sexual object. And on the other hand, we have the group. the group of all other women in the mind of an adolescent, all the other women together, grouped together, and they have all the characteristics that have to do with the various trends that are actually pervert. And we see that men talk about sexuality, but they never talk about this Madonna, this idealized woman, this unique sexual object. And unfortunately, this will be abandoned sooner or later. And dear Angelos very beautifully presented the wear and tear of Eros. And we see that Eros wears away and it's replaced by love. And I think we should make this distinction between Eros and love, which is long-term. And Angelos actually talked about love and death as we meet it in Cavafy, where everybody dies young and beautiful, and people have been loved, but to the extreme. And Cavafis did something very strange in his work. He never describes with great accuracy the roots, the lives of these men who die so young at such a young age. They are the object of desire. They're also very beautiful at the same time, and very handsome. And I think that this beauty is of great importance for their partner, their love partner. I've already noted some words, and then I would like you to actually elaborate on these words, meaning where do we have this distinction, or where is this meeting place between sexual desire and passion and lust and love? But let us hear from you, Mr. Chaniotis, now. So first of all, can you hear me? Yes, we can. Okay, then. I see that there is a small problem with the connection. I think we'll get over it, though. I think that I am here not as a victim of love or as the perpetrator, but as a historian who has studied this feeling of Eros in antiquity. And what I was taught when looking at all these pictures and texts from antiquity is that in order for us to look at all the aspects of love, we need to see how the creative imagination of various peoples, and in my case the ancient Greeks, approached the subject of love. So ancient Greeks, contrary to other peoples, personalized Eros and deified him. They made him a god. Eros, this winged god or deity with a bow and arrow, is the god of love. So Eros is a god himself. And we see that Eros has his bow and arrows. And here we have a basic feature of love, i.e. that love always has a specific target. It is always like that. There are hidden feelings as well. I may feel love. Love may overflow. I may feel happiness, but I might not be able to explain what I feel. I may feel anger. But when I'm in love, I always have a specific person I love. There is a specific person I'm in love with. And this is something we see from the different representations of Eros in ancient art. We know that love hurts. Love is also a warrior. Eros is a warrior. And when he hits someone with his arrows, the arrow stings. And this is why people are called love-struck. And we feel Eros, we feel love in our body. It has various manifestations that are apparent. we see that there are many stories in ancient Greece, and they talk about the pathology of Eros. A famous doctor in antiquity, Erasistratos, who was the first to look at how the heart functioned, he is the one who managed to look at the different signs and symptoms of a love-struck man. And he understood that this man was in love. And he described the symptoms just like he would describe in the case of a disease like pneumonia. Angelos is pale, his heart is not beating fast, sometimes he can't speak, he is at a loss for words. It's as if Eros has caused a pathology. It's as if Eros is a disease. And the third thing that one learns by looking at these ancient texts is the effect of love, the impact of Eros on man. We see that when somebody is in love, he is dedicated to the person he loves. And we see that love is slavery. It's as if the person who is love-struck is totally dedicated to the object of his or her desire, to his loved one. And this has to do with the fact that many people think of love as something that is not inside us, but that comes from outside, like a conqueror. It's a force that conquers us, that takes over, and this is why it affects our behavior and the way we think. This is all I had to say. I'll stop for now. I don't want to be long-winded, and I think that what I told you is good for starters.
I propose, before we actually continue, we should ask other people what love is, because we have asked quite a lot of you what it means, and we've said time and again that we've all fallen in love, we've all felt this emotion that we're trying to define. Also, we will have some photos to show. These are of archaeological finds, and we will see the differences and how love is reflected throughout the course of mankind. And we can indeed say that part of this material might not be suitable for children. So before we go, or before we kick off, let us all watch what answers are given when we put the question. And let's put the question to ourselves. So what is love? 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 Love is... What do you mean? Love? What is it? Love? I don't know. What is love? It's something that comes and goes. So, it's trust. It is, in fact, balance, life. It is equilibrium. It is a strong feeling. When one is in love, you become, in fact, more optimistic. Everything seems to be rosy. You're not afraid of taxes or anything. You're only interested in your love. Well, you know, it's a feeling in the stomach. Well, it makes you actually feel that you could do anything. If it's not strong, it's nothing. You can't control it. Love is beautiful. Love is a force that wakes you up in the morning. It makes you creative. It makes you dream. Well, love is a difficult thing in our times. There's a lack of trust in our days. Love is the only thing that exists in Greece because everything else is dire. I'm a teacher in a camp with refugees, and we see that love exists, but there's great hesitation. It exists, but it's hidden. Maybe that's what's sweet about it. Love is what is lacking in our lives, in all our lives. When we had it, well, we didn't value it, but now that we actually want it, it's too late. I'm always in love. I'm still in love. Come and see my wife. I'll show you my wife. This is my wife with me. Do you always have it with you? You always have your photograph of your wife with you? Yes. And you're still in love 40 years later? Fully in love. We're 50 years together. Well, you know, that's where you need to be strong. We're together 44 years, 50 years. Well, I was in Piraeus. She came to the post 1, 2, 3 times. We struck up a conversation. That's how we met. Well, love is everything in our life. Without that, we can't live. Well, in order to live together for the last 50 years, well, you have to show patience. Well, patience and compromise on both sides. There needs to be mutual understanding and respect. I believe that you can also find love in friendship. I think that this is the most important thing in my life. It's my dog. That's what I love. So one might love an object that comes alive because of your feelings. Well, love is everything. What else can I say? Have you experienced it? I'm a seaman. Of course I have. So, how can you describe it? I think I'm in love with somebody. Eros is that feeling of impulse that love is, in fact, this ephemeral chemistry between people that don't know each other. So you respect the other person, support them, accept them as they are. Well, Plato said everything. We don't need to say anything else. I think that Plato said that it starts in simple, tangible things, and we can actually love virtue. So today, I'd like you to tell me what love is. Love is a human feeling which actually comes from the soul of people, and it actually shows another person how much you love them. It's a strong emotion that one feels towards another person that you care about. It's a strong love, and this is different for every person, for every pair, for every couple. It's anything that makes your heart beat with an irregular pattern. So I think that that's love. That is love. Well, I have actually written down the following, that love actually makes you feel uncertain, that there's an upheaval, that you feel a tightness or a knot in your stomach. But we saw also that it's not only an emotion towards somebody else, but it's also towards an object or something that might come to life because of our emotions. It's also what brings a mother closer to her child. And we see that it can actually help you become a better person, or it might be your destruction. So let's actually start from the beginning. And let's come back to the question, is love actually connected to patience that we heard? Respected, which was actually mentioned time and again. Is Eros love? Is it also love and sexuality together? Are these three different conditions that must coexist? So, how are these connected?
So first of all, I'd like to congratulate those who created this wonderful video. It is very tender. It shows what Eros is. And Eros is nothing, but it's also more than that. Now, if there is... Slide number 9. I'd like us to look at slide number 9 again. Thank you. Let's try and see if we can find it. I don't know if it's possible. So let's see. Here we are. You talked about the mother and the child. Mr. Tzavaras would have a lot to say on this. And you see that Eros himself is breastfeeding, i.e. his mother's breast. First of all, we know that we have the fetus in the uterus and then they're born. But we see that Eros is very close to his mother, and he actually draws strength from his mother's body, even though he is considered one of the great entities. We have chaos, we have Gaia, and we have Eros. And they were not really born, they were unborn. They preceded birth. And this is very important. It's of elementary importance in order for us to understand that Eros is a unifying force. It's what brings together a couple, a human couple, a couple of gods, or even a couple, as you said, where we have the lover and the object of his desire and love. And this object may be a statue, for example, an inanimate object. So what we see is that this person is in love, not with what is represented by the statue, but with the statue itself, i.e. with matter. And the lady talks about Plato, and she says that Plato has said it all. And we know that Eros is not love, long-term love. It is not friendship. It is not respect. It may be all of this, but Eros is, at least in antiquity, connected to intercourse, to sex. Mr. Chaniotis, I'd like to hear from you as well. And Mr. Tzavaras, I'd like to hear from you too, i.e. what happens inside of us, what happens inside, and how can this be explained from the point of view of a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And let's see what happens when we have met a person falling in love with objects, and how this has been depicted, and how has love, Eros, been depicted in such cases. Well, first of all, let me point one thing out, that we may use the metaphor of Eros as love or dedication to or devotion to an object, but there's a problem here. And the problem is that Eros always wants to have some kind of consummation, some kind of giving, so reciprocity. So, for example, people fall in love with the statue of Aphrodite, and if it's not Pygmalion who can give life, breathe life into the statue, they then commit suicide, because then their love is unrequited. And we saw a depiction of Eros as a winged god with a bow and arrow. So Eros is a god that targets something specific. He looks at it and he targets it with his arrow. So it's not an abstract feeling. There's always some specific target. And the person who is love-struck is the person who will then try in every way possible to have physical contact with the object of desire. Let's look at the next picture. Yes, here we are. This actually shows a couple, and they are embracing. A man and a woman are hugging one another. Of course, this could have been rendered in a simpler fashion, but anyway, we see this complex. We see the way in which this love or the intercourse is depicted, and this shows the intensity of the feeling of love. Let's look at the next slide now. This is a characteristic expression of the force of love. Love, Eros, is so strong that even Zeus, the king of the gods, can remain away and not to be struck by Eros. So here we see that Eros is an exterior force, and we see Eros pushing Zeus, who has transformed himself into a swan in order to approach this woman, and she has turned her head to the side. She seems to be enjoying herself. And we see that her hands are not really trying to push away the person who is approaching her or the swan that is approaching her. Leda has actually placed her hands on the genitals of Zeus and helps him complete his mission. So here we see blind Eros, and here we see Eros pushing Zeus, pushing him forward. And this actually shows what the ancient Greeks thought of as Eros, an exterior force that is stronger than any other force. Now, if Plato chose Eros to use it as a metaphor in order to render love towards a superior force, Plato did it because he really believed in the strength of love, in the power of love and Eros. Now, Mr. Tzavaras, if we try to put all these elements together, everything that was mentioned by Mr. Stampolidis, but also by Mr. Chaniotis, and also taking into account the simple way in which we understand all this and the way in which we answer the question, what is Eros, what we saw in the video. So what can we conclude? And what can we say about the link between Eros, sexuality, and love, either vis-a-vis a person or vis-a-vis an object? First of all, let me express my admiration for ancient Greek art and ancient Greek thinking and how they were able to depict all these things so beautifully. These three pictures that we saw on the slide actually cover a lot on love and Eros and what people think about love and Eros. But let me, however, make a comment here. What the ancient Greek artists describe as an attack to subjectivity from the outside, from the exterior. In psychoanalysis, it is actually a manifestation of the subconscious. And here we have various archaic experiences, if you like, coming to the fore. But what I'd like to say is the following. We have this strong relationship between the mother and the newborn. In the beginning, this is sexual, if you like, force. We know that the infant seeks its mother's breast in order to satiate this need for self-survival. It wants to eat and devour the breast of the mother. So we see that this is something ruthless. And this actually drives the child to the mother's breast. And the mother accepts this impulsive force shown by the infant, by the newborn. And then something very absurd happens. And actually, this is underscored first by Freud, i.e. that when the child has fed and when it has come to the point of saturation, sucks its thumb. And it actually stimulates the mucosa, not because it drinks, but because it wants to feel this sexual urge. It's a first, if you like, emotion or first way of satisfying oneself. And here we have sexuality and self-survival as one, and we know that the sexuality actually is made stronger by the mother's love. We know that the mother touches the child, it hugs the child, and in a way the child is aroused, sexually aroused. And of course, this will then develop through the psychosexual route that is followed. And I'm not going to describe it right now, it's quite complex. But you see here that love and Eros actually has to do with one's body. So we see that in ancient Greece, we see a lot of works of art showing this, but this is something we see happening in every person. And just one last comment, if I may, and then I'll stop my soliloquy, my monologue. The analysis and art, and not always, of course, is not only based on direct observations. Analysts like Freud have not described in the strict way of contemporary psychology that observes everything. They haven't written down what is happening between the newborn and the mother, but what is happening between the psychoanalyst and the one being psychoanalyzed. So we actually see what happens during a psychoanalysis. And this is also found in art. We heard Mr. Chaniotis and Mr. Stampolidis saying a lot of very interesting things, some very pertinent remarks. And I think that this corresponds to our clinical experience. So I think just like in the case of myth, every analysis, every person has his or her own development psychoanalytically. And of course, there are many differences, many variations. That's all for me now.
Well, you've actually analysed many points, and I would like now to turn to Ms. Papaoikonomou. If we actually look at what's happening nowadays, I mean, most of us are experiencing modern men and women. What do we identify with, or rather, what are you inspired by? Because I think we must all look at what we identify with. That is, a person who actually has an unrequited love, or the reverse. What do you mean, identify with? Who do we feel greater compassion for? Obviously, the person who is smitten by unrequited love. But now, I would like to actually take a step back a bit and say that I love the fact that we have love being the development of Eros in a couple. It's the sound and healthy development of it. So it is the result of patience, of mutual acceptance and respect. So all of these points come after Eros. Well, what I wanted to ask, and perhaps I was not able to put my question across now. Those of you who actually express yourself through art, are you actually more struck by people who feel unrequited love? And I would like to ask, in what form of art do we express better unrequited love, or love in which we find more fulfillment? I would like to talk about what would be a source of inspiration for me to write. That would be unrequited love, because I'm very interested in the consequences of unrequited love on a person. What are the lengths they'd go to if they can't really experience what they want? Now, would they go to extremes? So I think if we see a couple that's in love, they experience this love, and there's a happy end there. But I don't find that as interesting as unrequited love. I hope that I answered the question. Well, this brings me to the next question. Where can somebody go to? And I put this question to all. So how far can, or to what lengths will unrequited love push us to? So I think we might actually show our worst possible self, which would include a tendency for revenge and hatred. And there might be self-destruction there. We might commit suicide. There might be depression. So this might actually turn against the person themselves or the object of their unrequited love. And that is where we have this feeling of danger also. I will agree and disagree also. From an artistic point of view, as Mirella actually has stated it, I think it's very, very interesting indeed. But I think the optimistic and a wonderful love can be expressed also through art, in the movies or in another art form, through music or through other art forms. So this is a good example. We would like to actually set unrequited love as the path to be avoided. But I would believe that when we have love and people who feel fulfilled through love, we can actually set that as the good example. So I like to tell my young audiences that love actually brings God within you, and this automatically has the following result. It actually awakens your senses, because you actually feel it through all your senses, through your nose, your hands and your eyes. So it is not only love through one's tablet or one's mobile phone. It's wrong to believe that's the only way. So even the example of a quote-unquote convenient love that has a happy end is a good thing. I think it is, in fact, something that we should show to young people to set the good example. Because Eros is the god from amongst all modern and ancient gods that has the greatest number of adjectives. He's gentle, gentle-footed, and he actually fills his path with flames, and he actually addles your brains. And Sappho, in her poems, has a wonderful expression. She says that Eros blew my mind, as does the northern wind, which throws the pine needles from the tree in the middle of winter. So I'm looking to you, Mr. Chaniotis, now. We have a question, because I want us to look at the present and the past. Is Eros a matter of love or chemistry? How do we actually classify it?
Very nice question and very nice comments. But before answering, please allow me to quickly make some comments myself. One, this has to do with the way that ancient art and ancient literature deals with Eros. And I would like to say that Eros, which Eros actually inspires us, the unrequited love inspires us. And we see that good ancient art and good ancient literature actually talk about feelings, but they also are essays on feelings. It has to do with the consequences of feelings. This is why art and literature have paid a lot of attention to Eros, which either is not complete or which has got nothing to do with a balanced state. And here we're talking about specific feelings. And we know that according to some neurobiologists, these are defense mechanisms, survival mechanisms. So without complete love, there is no survival of mankind. This is why unrequited love, where there is lack of justice, or we see that the Furies actually go after something but never find what they're looking for. So it's just like Eros. Unrequited love are dangerous for society, but also for the very survival of mankind. And now let me answer the question whether Eros is luck or whether it's chemistry. It must be both. And we also saw this on the video that we watched just some minutes ago, and I think it was very good. A gentleman there says that I feel great, and we see, he says, I happen to find the woman I love. So we see that it's serendipity, and sometimes people who could be a perfect match for one another never meet. But we also have chemistry. That's also important, because sometimes we see that there are two people that come close together, but there's no chemistry, and then it won't work either. So there is no love there, no Eros. And let me come back to the subject of unrequited love. And I'd like to say that we have some great myths in ancient mythology, and we have tragedy. For example, we have Achilles, who falls in love with a woman, and this woman then is killed. We also have Niarchos, who falls in love with himself. He sees his image reflected on the surface of the water, and whenever he tries to touch his image, i.e. the object of his desire, he cannot touch it. This is love that inspires, and here we see that this is love that is unrequited, but there is also an element of injustice, and this, of course, is dangerous because it cannot be controlled, so it needs to be controlled somehow. Mr. Tzavaras, last thing. Can we know what the extent of love is? Do we know our limits as regards unrequited love? Meaning, could it lead to hatred? What about self-destruction? And we heard a lot about that earlier. Well, there's a history behind this. I talked about the relationship, the bond between the newborn and the mother. This is something that we can actually look at later, and we have Oedipus, or sometimes we need to monitor what's happening during puberty, adolescence, and we know that the relationship between the mother and the child, there's a love-hate relationship, and there's a lot of aggression, and this has to do with the fact that the child is disappointed, meaning the mother, for many reasons, is not in a position to respond to the needs of the newborn or the child, either because the mother picks her husband, who is her lover, or because she has other chores or other needs. We know that the child feels disappointed, and this is the first, if you like, manifestation of the self-destructive aggression. And this is an absolute truth. Now, over time, the child will realize that what is this polarization between the good elements and the bad elements of his or her mother, well, this will then slowly become organized in a more complex picture, i.e. the child can over time understand that he or she can still love his or her mother even though she remains a wicked witch. And of course, this is something that the analyst develops in different ways. But it also shows this first relationship, and here we have narcissism, we have aggression, and we have love, all these feelings that are in stark contrast with one another. And then we see that these things will manifest themselves in the adult differently. And Mrs. Mirella Papaoikonomou talked about the complexity of the manifestations of love. And here I'd like to make a leap forward, if you don't mind, and I'd like first to hear your comments as well. So in art and in the literature, in global literature, here we have a link between destruction, Eros, and death. And it is not a coincidence that some of my colleagues talk about the impulse of death as something that constitutes an amalgam with Eros, something inevitable. It's not that everybody agrees, meaning that there's this death urge, this urge that accompanies love, and the many disappointments that one encounters, i.e. that people are always exposed to the narcissist type disappointment. And this has to do with one's inner world, but also to interpersonal relationships. But I leave this for later. I'd like to hear the views of the other speakers. Thank you. Thank you. We're all ears. Could you just add to what Mr. Tzavaras said? Well, if we link Eros to sexuality, every root, and I'm talking about the motion of love, the love that a man feels towards a woman, and the path that it follows. Well, this has one goal, i.e. the propagation and the survival of mankind. But this happens once, whereas all other forms of intercourse lead to death, meaning the sperm dies either in the vagina of the woman or elsewhere. So this impulse ends in death. And only if we have conception, only then is life created, and only then is the life continued. And this is why Eros, sexuality, and death coexist. And this is something that poets say, that psychologists, all these things are interconnected, they're interlinked. For example, there are statues of Eros with wings or without wings, and we see that they hold in their hands two torches. One torch is held upwards, which is life, and the other torch is looking down, i.e. towards death. So we see that the same God is both. So, can we control this, though? Do we have control over it? I'm talking about all these feelings and emotions. Well, people cannot control anything. We are, and this is my opinion, my personal view, we're something between animals and God. It depends on where we're looking at. Are we looking towards the animal, i.e. lack of conscience, or are we looking towards God, trying to be in his image and likeness? So it depends. My mother used to say, I kiss you with any lips I have, and I look at you with any eyes that I have. So I can't hear you, Mr. Tzavaras, because you haven't got a microphone. But I saw you smiling. Whether we can control these feelings or not, what do you think? What's your take on this?
Well, it's a very complex issue for a psychiatrist and analyst. That depends on the clinical traits. So I'm talking about my own experiences, of course. So it is true that sometimes we can't actually control these tendency towards self-destruction. So they can be hysterical. You know, when a 16-year-old girl comes to me and says, I want to kill myself because yesterday I went to a concert and this singer didn't look at me in the eyes. And, you know, we were 100 meters away. So these are narcissistic disappointments, and they're very habitual and commonplace. But there is also depression, whereby somebody actually identifies with death, and they believe themselves to be death. So I have nobody left here in this world. I have no relationship to this world, and we see that this is almost psychotic. So we cannot answer this question easily, and we have a huge range and spectrum of conditions. But we all know what disappointment is, don't we? All know also this relationship between death and Eros, or death and love, because when we actually lose somebody that we love, there is this inner death, because we know that when we mourn somebody, there is an inner death that comes about. I'm very thankful to you for the example that you gave before. I have spoken a lot, so I'd like to hand over to Ms. Papaoikonomou. I wanted to say something, but first and foremost, there's a question mark attached to what I would like to say. So we have a young couple, a young man who is, in fact, in such a situation of unrequited love, or love that actually is disrupted for one reason or another, and they might feel themselves to be out of control. So I wanted to ask you the following, that as people grow older, and I'm talking about somebody who's middle-aged, where common sense starts to play a role, I think that they can actually control these impulses better. So as they become older, they actually lose that control, and then we have the love that older people show, and they seem to lose control because they feel that things are coming to an end, and that drives them crazy. Is it true that when one is 40 or 45, that the intrusion of common sense helps people to control their feelings better when they feel a disappointment, when they feel that their love isn't requited, or when a relationship comes to an end? And I'm looking towards both of you. I think that both of you can answer this question, and of course, Mr. Chaniotis. I don't know if Angelos wants to say something. Well, I would very much like to add something, as Nikos actually challenged me. I think the answer to this question is closely linked to the following. It has to do with the cultural and political conditions that prevail, because one of the objectives of ancient Greek societies, and other societies for that matter, is to put emotions under control, and that includes love. And ancient Greek society has the following particularities. So we see that passion amongst, a wedding is actually arranged. It's not between people who are in love. There are other institutions, and that is of prostitution. Prostitution, which is different from what we know today. We have the eteres that are, in fact, very cultivated women, and they are the object of desire. And we see that somebody is not in love with their spouse, but they are very much fulfilled through their marriage. So this is a distinction. Another example, which is more characteristic, is the fact that we have, in fact, love between a mature man and adolescent. And this is a Cretan love because it's associated with that land. So the elder person will, in fact, abduct a young person, and here there is, in fact, another factor, and that is of friendship. And who I speak to about my love. Is it something that I keep to myself, or do I speak openly to my peers? In Crete, the mature man talks about the object of the desire, and he says it to his peers, and if he actually permits it, they will actually allow him to pursue this course. And there are other, in fact, examples, but I would like not to be very long-winded. So I think that these examples give us the cultural and societal profile, and we see how society can actually allow us to feel and experience our life. And it's not how we will actually experience it in our body, and it will allow us to show it or not, to talk about it with others, or to keep it to ourselves. So I think it will actually play a role in how we experience love. So I would like to add something to the question that Mrs. Papaoikonomou put. How does one's mental capacity actually affect it? Does thinking affect this? I'd like to say that we could reach a different conclusion for every single different person, every individual. So even though I actually have a lot of examples to cite, I'd like to talk about myself. When I was a teenager, feelings were, in fact, so passionate that if they were unrequited, I could feel sorrowful for a long time. As I have grown older, I have understood that I can actually transform these emotions. And perhaps if I felt sad for a week when I was 25 years of age, this lasted for 2 days, and later on it lasted even less. What do I mean by that? I would not like to say that my emotions were no longer strong when I was 45. No. Indeed, I think that they were very substantial, because I was able to also analyze why I had fallen in love. So critical thinking came into play. I was able to process it mentally. And I was able to see why I had this object of desire, why it wasn't somebody else. But I actually became afraid of this, and I managed to bring about a balance a bit later, because I was able initially to control my passion through reasoning, but this was, in fact, a little death. Every time my emotions died a bit, it was like imposing my reason over life. So I managed to strike a balance between the two. And Anna Cynthia actually alluded to this. I must say that I prefer your name, Cynthia. So she alluded to it by saying that there was, in fact, a transformation of the object of desire, because I know that it didn't have that this feeling did not have the same intensity over time, and there was this transformation into friendship and respect, appreciation, and love. Because whenever I have sought in all the dictionaries, I saw that no language actually reflects or defines love as we do. Joxeviorum, I love you. Je t'aime in Greek. Agapo starts with A and finishes with omega. So it's the beginning and the end all together. So it's the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet. So when you love, you don't fall in love, but you actually contain Eros within love. So it is then that you find the way to not allow reasoning to control you, or feelings with the sense of Eros, but you're able to encompass it all. Thank you, Mr. Tzavaras. If I may interject, yes, of course, Mr. Chaniotis. So there is, in fact, a difference between I love and I fall in love. So when I say agapo, I love, is in fact active, in which I am the one who loves somebody else, and falling in love, erotevome, means that I am, in fact, the one that feels this emotion. Of course, there is also a distinction between the lover and the person who is loved in ancient Greece. But I would like to agree completely that somebody who actually develops properly will be able to actually combine aggressivity with love and eros. And I think this is very important, and I think we can't overlook the fact that the erotic urges are in fact linked always to a certain level of aggressivity. In psychoanalysis, we like to talk about the fact that people actually are able to regress. So even quite an old person can regress, and they can actually manifest behavior that they felt that they'd left very far behind. Now, if I may make a comment that has to do with ancient Greece, and it shows the duration of passion. Oedipus, in Kolonos, even though he is in fact blind, and he's lost touch with this world, and he's in fact very old, feels a destructive rage, and he is vibrating with emotions. One might well feel that it is time for peace and calm to actually reign over him in his old age. But I'm saying this because we can understand what a huge spectrum of reactions and erotic reactions are. I don't need to actually refer to Shakespeare, because we know that he eloquently describes the trials and tribulations and the very strong feelings of people when they are of a more advanced age. And this is a very good explanation to what you described before, Mrs. Papaoikonomou, Nikos. I don't know if somebody from the audience would like to put a question, or whether we could actually hear your views also. So far, I haven't seen, in fact, anybody wanting to put themselves forth. Ah, the lady. Okay, if you can please wait for us to give you a microphone. And then the gentleman. Well, good evening. I must say that this is a very enjoyable experience. What a wonderful discussion. I would like to say that I agree completely with Mr. Stampolidis with respect to his initial views, what he initially said, that is, and that was that Eros has an expiry date. It comes to an end. Thankfully, this is the case because it might well be the most amazing emotion, but it's also, in fact, something that is that can be very hurtful. It actually can cause a lot of ills, and it could be the end of us. It makes one possessive, it makes one jealous, and this actually poisons the life of a couple. Now, whether an unrequited love or reciprocal love is in fact more touching, I think an unrequited love is in fact something that inspires books and movies and poems. I don't think that anybody has actually felt themselves so moved by a couple who fell in love, then married, had children, and sat on the sofa together in their slippers. I think we were all touched by unrequited love that's led to suicide or to other difficult situations. It is an orthodox love that actually touches the most. In my case, the quintessence of love is, in fact, Elita's monogram that actually describes exactly this unrequited love of mature gentleman for a young girl.
May I say something? Of course. Well, the lady who just spoke is very correct in what she said. There are such cases of great passion which changed the course of history, like Antonio and Cleopatra, for example. Hello, please allow me to improvise. I was very happy to come here, and I'm happy to be here, and I would like to express my feelings, and I'd like to say that I actually like the fact that we are here. We saw the sunset, we have the Acropolis on the other side, and I'd like to thank Stavros Niarchos Foundation for everything it has offered Greeks. So please don't take it wrong. Don't actually misinterpret the fact that I'm wearing red today, but I'm also wearing a bulletproof vest because I'm getting ready for the Argentinian tango later on. You have to be careful when you're at my age. I'd like to ask a question to the members of the panel and the professor of psychiatry. Since I am a man, I represent the male sex, and I'm going to talk about Greek folk music because it's a spontaneous expression of what people feel. Most of these songs where people are actually singing and lamenting are these actually the expression of men that are actually in pain. Are women silent? Don't they express themselves? Don't they suffer? Don't they feel anything? And the question is, when men are disappointed and when they have been rejected, is this something that you see more often than in the case of women? Is this something that expresses only Greek men, or is it something general? Well, I don't have the answer. I can't answer that question that easily. And I've never looked into that matter, to be honest. But what you said is that men actually express themselves more openly than women. At least this has been the case so far. Please allow me to say something. I never doubted the aesthetics of women. All I'm saying is that maybe men express themselves through song more openly. Maybe they express their disappointment more in relation to women who might keep it inside and not express it. They don't want it to be out there in the open. So this has to do with history. It has to do with the evolution of Greek society. So I think it has to do with social norms and what the social norms dictate. So I think that we now have the emancipation of women, and we see that there are more women present in science and in art. Now, I'd like to say that in medicine we have more women than men. We have more doctors, that is. So what we know is that men actually repeat this disappointment over and over and over again. And this is maybe the reason they want to put it in song and to express themselves through song. And maybe this has to do with their relationship with their mother, because the mother is more focused on the male infant in her arms, meaning when she has a boy, I think she's more focused on the boy rather than on the girl, because she is heterosexual. And this means that later on, the man, when growing up, has this fear of becoming dependent upon women again. And this is why in men, we actually have the Don Juan phenomenon. As a result, this leads more to the sublimation. So there's this sublimation. This is mentioned by Seferis, meaning we see that the man expresses himself through song and through art in order not to create more permanent relations. This is all I had to say by way of comment. I have nothing further to add. I'm just thinking out loud. One more question. Do I have to do something? I've got a microphone. Can you hear me? So thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. And please allow me to greet Mr. Chaniotis, who's on the other side of the Atlantic. We are his students from Mathesis. So nice to see you again. So the first question that comes to mind is sin, and how sin is connected to Eros. And we're talking about religion now. So we see that love and sin are connected often in religion. And the second question, it might not be that clear because at Mathesis I didn't attend the philosophy course. So what is the dimension of Platonic love? What do we mean by Platonic love? Is it a figure of speech? Do we mean unrequited love without sex, without intercourse? Thank you very much, and hello once again. I can answer the first question. The verb to be sinful in ancient Greece, but also in Christianity, means I don't find my target. This is what the word amartano, the verb amartano means. I miss the target. First of all, let me thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for actually providing the funds for the Mathesis courses. And I'd like to thank the students of Mathesis who are watching me today. Now, let's talk about the link between Eros and sin. This is, if you like, something that's linked to culture. We heard that the verb amartano means I miss the target. And it also means I commit a mistake or an error, i.e., I behave in a way that is not acceptable. So Eros is the subject, it's sinful only when you have a violation of social norms. For example, there are some texts from Asia Minor where you have the confessions of laymen, and their eros is sin only when, for example, it is linked to adultery. It is a sin when some norm is violated. For example, you have somebody confessing his sins in these texts. For example, there was someone who actually had sex with a courtesan, and he did this in a temple, in a shrine, and this was a sin. And there was another case where somebody actually had sex with a married woman, and this again is a sin. So we see that eros and sin are connected to the religion that investigates the matter. And here I'm talking about Christianity, for example. Now let me talk about Platonic love. Platonic love is a figure of speech. Plato incorrectly chose eros as the emotion which leads man to an impulse, to this desire to approach the divine. It is not love, it is not care, it is eros. It's a driving force. It's a force one has when trying to find the divine. So we also know about carnal desire. And of course, we have Socrates in the symposium, and I don't think I have time to describe this now. But I'd like to say that the main purpose behind this figure of speech is this force, this brute force, and the fact that this type of eros is not connected to carnal desire. It's this desire to become one with the divine and to come close to something that is higher than us. We still have some questions, I think 4, because we need to bring this to an end. There's a lady in front who'd like to ask a question, and then I'll give the floor to the other people who want to ask questions.
Oh, we heard before that agapo, I love, is in fact unique because it has alpha and omega, but amartano also, I sin, has alpha and omega, the first and last letter of the alphabet. But agapan has within it the feeling from the person's soul creating. But amartano is imposed by the conditions, the societal conditions, as I explained before, and as Mr. Chaniotis told you also. And this actually is connected to religion. These are two different things. Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I heard before the question about whether eros can be transformed into love. Do you believe that there can be, in fact, this great substantial love between a couple that has not gone through sexual love, through eros? I think, or do you think that the couples that love each other now have always been in love in the past? Well, I believe that we cannot actually transform. You're talking to about a normal couple, about a man and a woman. We're not talking about a parent towards its child. Good. So I don't believe that it's possible to actually have love without first having sexual love, without having eros beforehand. It's not that you cannot love another person. You can love a person for various reasons, but that is not sexual in nature, and we don't have there the impulse of Eros. But when we're talking about the transformation of Eros, or the fact that Eros can last through time, then we know that Eros has managed to exist, taking on various forms, but it is always changing. It is ever changing. Let me ask you, what happens within an arranged marriage? So two people actually get married, and they've convinced them that they have to marry. It's been arranged by their parents, and over the course of time they get to love each other without sexual love actually bringing this about. Well, you said it very correctly, that through time or over time they get to love each other. And we know that these are people who have lived together. It's like we say in Greece that they were put into the same washing machine and they've come out pink. So, Mr. Chaniotis, in antiquity, for the most part, was in fact arranged. There was a contract, matchmaking between people who had a great age difference. They might not well have Eros, and they referred to love. And they rather referred to the relationship as one that was full of affection. So I think that this is often the case when we have a large age difference. And I think that a very good example is the case when there was, in fact, a couple where there was a gentleman that was 20 years older than his wife, and we had this affection that was very sweet. So there is affection towards the person that they've actually spent their life with, and the meanings that are deployed in order to express this love were in fact those meanings and concepts that we heard in this wonderful video that we saw: respect, appreciation, and consideration for others, for another person's personality. But this is something that expresses this connection very well. And somebody talked about his wife who died when she was very young, and he said that she left her less breath in his mouth. So this also shows that this relationship between two people who were actually married through an arrangement, matchmaking or contract, this actually has led to this sweet commitment and love between these two people that is a physical connection too.
Yes, that is true, because in ancient Greece, a bride could be 12 years of age, and she could get married to her husband, not go to his home up until she became of age, because it's the assets that were brought together that became one of the two spouses. And of course, this doesn't mean that these people will fall in love later on, but you talked about those who do not actually fall in love. And this is why I answered the way I did and Angelos did. Well, just one more question because we have to end. Well, hello. I want to ask the following question. You actually said, Professor Chaniotis, that this only was in antiquity, and you said that Eros is what two people feel, and that there is only an erotic, if you like, element. What about love towards science, love towards art, anything that one may feel about an activity? What is that then? if it's not Eros. And I'd like to ask Professor Stampolidis, if Eros is the distance, the time that it takes for the arrow to hit the target, the object of desire, if it's that time, that distance needs to be covered. If love is consummated, if it's complete, can't it become bigger? And how can one remain in love? And we see that he's in love with ancient Greece, and his love becomes stronger over time. And we heard about Mathesis, which is fantastic, and I'd like to encourage Professor Stampolidis to join in and to take part in Mathesis. Angelos, I'll give you some time for the first question, unless you're ready to answer. I am ready to answer the question. Well, I think that this comment and the question were both very pertinent. And I think Eros can be a love for science, a love for art, a love for music, and for some activity. But there needs to be reciprocity. If there is no reciprocity, there's no love. And if you love creation, if you love the piano, if you love music, if you love the opera, where's the reciprocity here? The reciprocity has to do with what you feel when you engage in an activity, but it's not the same response we have in carnal love when we love another person. It's the joy that you feel by engaging in an activity. And this is why the meaning of Eros, of love, can be used for this type of relationship, where another word that cannot be translated is the word meraki, the Greek word meraki, which means doing something with passion and with skill and craftsmanship. So it's got to do with an attraction towards something, and for which we want to dedicate our time and to spend time and be creative and so on and so forth. And this is what we get out of it, this joy, the joy of engaging in activity. Angelos actually answered the question, and he covered a lot of what I had to say, and he talked about the short duration, and the neuropsychologist says that Eros, this passionate love, lasts from 2 seconds to 2-3 years. So there is this time frame, and after that it becomes long-term love, it becomes friendship. Now, as regards Mathesis, these courses I would love to attend, but I have no time. But I will try to follow your advice, and I will try to participate in Mathesis. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank everybody who attended this event. I'd also like to thank those of you who also watched us through live streaming. This was the fourth, if you like, event that we organized in Dialogues. It was a lovely discussion. Dialogues is an initiative of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. I'd like to warmly thank all the speakers. Mrs. Papaoikonomou, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Stampolidis, Mr. Tzavaras, of course, Mr. Chaniotis. It was great, thanks to technology, to be with you throughout this discussion. I must say that right after this event, in just a couple of minutes, and after everything that was said and everything that was discussed, we will have all this uploaded on the site of the Stavros Niarchos site, snf.org, and there will be subtitles, and everything will be in English. So everything that was mentioned will be uploaded, and there will be subtitles. So see you in March again. So the date will be the 21st of March, and in a few days from now, there will be an announcement on snf.org where you'll have more details about our next event. Thank you very much, everyone. Of course, we'd also like to thank Cynthia and Lenya Vlavianou, and of course Stavros Niarchos Foundation, and thank you all for coming here. Thank you. I just want to say one last thing, if you don't mind. I'm on the other side of the Atlantic. Where there is Eros, there's also jealousy or envy. I'm really envious because you're there and I'm here. So I am green with envy.